Gardener's World. Well, I don't suppose there is a garden in the land now that isn't feeling the effects of the drought. And one of the things that are happening in the garden is that plants, annuals, perennials, are setting seed much earlier than they normally would. And once they've set seed, they then start to brown off because they've done their work. And they start behaving as though it was September or even October. Now, the thing to do is to cut back. Don't be frightened just because you don't normally cut plants back in August. To cut back the dead material sometimes means cutting the whole plant flush to the ground. At least there's a real chance if you do that if we get rain, there will be fresh growth, even if it doesn't bear fresh flowers. And what I'm going to be doing today across the whole programme is looking at ways of mitigating the harm that's done to the garden by lack of water, and also celebrating the plants and even whole areas of garden that actually are doing very nicely. Coming up in today's show, Joe visits a green oasis in West London.
People are really scared of putting shade into their garden, but it can do so much.
And we catch up with Adam at home as he designs a brand new gravel garden.
This is a little beauty. It's a ginger rosemary. So you get rosemary to start with, then it finishes off with ginger.
And I shall be looking at how to water wisely, and also checking up on the Paradise Garden. This is a rambling rose. It's called Felicite Perpetuae, perpetual happiness. And typically with rambling roses, it had a mass of small blooms. In this case, they're slightly pinky buds, and then they open out into a full-petaled, small white flowers. It's glorious. It's very, very typical in its behavior on how a rambler behaves as opposed to a climber. And the easiest thing to remember is rambling roses have these great arch stems that I'm sure there is an inclination to cut these back and tidy them away. But these are going to provide next year's flowers, or at least the best ones. So what we want to prune, if anything, is the oldest growth. Now the first thing I want to do is get up like that. Now, I have these wires here that are running down the roof. One there, and another one over there. And I thought if I tied into them, that would work. But actually what happens is that the roses slip down the wires. So the whole thing is pushed down by gravity, and you get a great clump of rose above the window. So I'm going to attach some horizontal wires, and hopefully that will do the trick. I just remember, with all growth, the more vertical it is, the more vigorous it will be. So if you want to slow growth down, make it horizontal. And if you want to speed it up, tie it up so it's more vertical. But in this case, I want to slow it down because ramblers, some of them extremely so, are vigorous. So if I cut here, and this old growth here, that creates room for this one to come across. What I really like about rose pruning and training is that you are both establishing order, and a lot of gardening is just that. It's establishing some kind of order out of chaos. And also you're setting something up. You know that you're doing it good, that next year's performance will be better as a result. And that's deeply satisfying. It's going to take me a little bit longer to tidy up and finish the job, but you can see what I'm trying to do. Now, I do know that although we all love roses, many of us, and myself included, for quite a long time, feel a bit baffled by all the different types and the different kinds and the different ways of pruning. Over the last few weeks, Nick has been demystifying that, and now we come to the final installment of his rose story.
Last time I looked at Floribunda, Hybrid Tea and Bourbon Roses, which have long been celebrated for their incredible range of scent and their voluptuous blooms. Today I'm going to be looking at how rose breeders have taken the genus to the next level, giving us gardeners a veritable sweet shop of blooms which combine the best of old rose form and colour, but with the bonus of repeat flowering all the way through summer. And it's these roses which have had a huge impact on the history of the genus. Joseph Pemberton, a passionate rose breeder, developed a range of wonderful roses, the hybrid musks. They are the result of crossing China roses with others from Asia and Japan. For me, one of the best hybrid musks has to be this. It's Rosa ballerina, and it's been around since 1937, and I think that longevity is an incredible endorsement of it being a good and high value rose. It's not scented, but I think it more than makes up for that in many different ways. It produces these big trusses of flowers which repeat all the way through summer. So as this fades, this next truss over here will come into flower. Now the individual blooms are great because they're single, which means they're really useful for pollinators, but they also have a lovely quality to them. They start with this darker pink bud, then they fade through to having this pickety edge, and then through to a near white bloom. So it gives you this lovely multi-tonal quality through the whole plant. Arguably the most popular of roses gracing our borders today are the English roses. The man responsible for these is David Austin, a farmer's son who in the 60s was inspired by a neighbouring plant breeder to concentrate on hybridising roses rather than crops. David's ambition was to give gardeners an improved range of roses with full blooms, packed with petals that offer that classic and highly sought after old rose look with a longer flowering period, health and vigour, and where possible, an attractive scent. This is one of the newest English roses. It's Thomas à Becket, and it really embodies what English roses are. It's got these fantastic full blooms which repeat all the way through the season, and it's got a great scent, which is really old rose, so it's just so charming. But the thing that I particularly like about this cultivar is it's got quite loose, open habit, so it almost feels like a wild or species rose. And it's got great height. It'll come up to 5 or 6 feet. Now, in terms of the blooms themselves, well, they've got this delicious sort of crimson look to them, and then they've got this slightly lax habit to the flowers as well, which I think gives it a lovely quality. In terms of growing it in the garden, it's really adaptable. It will grow in full sun, as it is here, and equally it will grow in part shade. To have a brilliant display of English roses going all summer, deadheading is key. This is loosely termed as summer pruning. Doing this regularly keeps them flowering and directs the plant's energy in producing new blooms. It's best to remove the spent flowers and around 6 inches of stem to increase the performance of the plant. One of my absolute favourite English roses is this. It's Queen of Sweets. It oozes pure romance. If you see it from a distance, it almost appears white, but as you get closer to it, you see it's got that beautiful baby pink that comes out from the centre and then gets paler as it moves towards the edges of that cupped flower. There's almost a pear-like quality to the massive ruffled petals that are all packed in there. As if that weren't enough, it's also got a fantastic scent. There's hints of myrrh and Parma violet in there, which I think are absolutely lovely. In terms of how you use this in the garden, it's great because you can mix it into herbaceous or shrub borders. I've used it in the past as a hedging plant, but equally it will stand alone. Now, it works brilliantly also as a cut flower. If you're looking for fantastic scents and pure, unadulterated romance, you'd have to go a long way to find a rose better than this. Over the last few weeks, we've been looking at the story of the nation's favourite flower, from traditional forms right the way up to modern cultivars. And there really is an incredible range of roses out there in terms of colour, form and size, meaning that there's one to suit every single garden. So be brave, try out a new form and celebrate the incredible flower that is the rose.
This is a rose called Charles Darwin, which is one of the David Austin roses, the English roses, that essentially will flower all summer long. Although these here had a really good burst of flowering in June and early July, then have been deadheaded and haven't produced many more yet. But they will. I'm not worried about them. I've had a letter from Una O'Malley, a viewer who said that she has an iceberg rose, which normally flowers from June right through into winter. And I know that icebergs can be flowering on Christmas Day. But this year, that's not the case. It flowered, and now there are none to be seen. Now, I would say this is a direct result of the extreme heat and dryness we've had. Different plants will react to the conditions in different ways. Roses do it by not producing flowers, because that takes a lot of energy. So if water and nutrients are in scarce supply, then you could try a high potash feed along with watering, and that may well stimulate flowering. And then I'm really confident, Una, that your iceberg will flower again once it starts to rain. The one thing that really helps roses of every kind is mulching. Now, don't mulch now. If you mulch over dry soil, you just seal in that dryness, and if you do get a bit of rain, it sometimes just gets soaked up damp. And the best time to do it is either October or again in early spring, March. And a thick layer of mulch, and it's no good mulching thinly. You really need sort of 3, 4, 5 inches of the stuff, of good garden compost or well-rotted manure, as wide as you can around the base of each shrub. Will keep the moisture in all summer long. It'll suppress weeds, which would otherwise take moisture and nutrients, and it will gradually work into the soil and feed the plant. And that will do more good than anything else at all. But don't worry about roses. Roses are amongst the toughest plants, as well as the most beautiful in your garden. Whereas roses will try and delay producing seed, any annuals or biennials exist only to produce seed. That is their sole function in life. But what's happened this year is plants like poppies and other annuals have produced their seed much earlier, and they've ripened much quicker. So, for example, a poppy like this, at this stage of summer, is normally still a little bit green and that touch of that lovely white powdery coating over it. Now, it's dried up, and if you rattle it, you can hear the seed. And if you can hear the seed in the pod, it means it's ripe, and when the wind blows, that will disperse it. If you can redistribute the seed where you want them, rather than where they naturally fall, then that's a good bit of planning for next year. So if I pull up this poppy, try not to spill the seed as I do so. Like that, holding it upright, pull that one up too. Now I'm going to take these, not very far, but I'm going to sprinkle them straight away. And then if I spray this like that, and then over here, and although there are thousands of seeds in these various rather beautiful heads, which by the way I'm going to keep and use for decoration, probably only half a dozen seeds will propagate, but at least they'll be spread out around the garden rather than being in great clusters. And poppies like sunlight and disturbed soil in order to germinate, which is why they grow in borders and cornfields. Now, that's just poppies, but other plants you can do too. What I like about seed collecting and sowing like this, it's the lazy man's gardening. There's nothing complicated or technically difficult about it. What I'm going to do is cut this foxglove, the whole thing down the bottom here. Too many foxgloves. Now, I do have quite a lot of foxgloves in here, but A, I want more, and B, this one I let grow on the edge of the jewel garden, even though it was the wrong colours, because it was exceptionally handsome. Just that combination of pinks, purples, touches of white was really, really successful. So with any luck, its offspring will carry some of those qualities into these borders. And again, I'm just going to shake. And the seed is like dust. Unlike poppies, foxglove should germinate very quickly, but might take a few years before it flowers. But if you do it every year, you'll get this succession of growth and flowering. Now, we all hunt after as much flowering as we can in the garden. It is the aim of most gardens, particularly in summer. But this year, because of the drought, we have far fewer flowers. But what we're left with is still lovely. The green of a garden and all those subtle shades not only looks beautiful, but is incredibly calming and restful. And Joe has been to visit a garden that specializes in producing green foliage of every shape and form.
Welcome to Field House, a tranquil oasis in West London containing a vast collection of exotics, impressive lush structural planting and an alluring water feature. I'm meeting self-taught garden designer and psychotherapist Rupert King to find out how he created this serene and intimate sanctuary.
So Rupert, it's a beautifully calming, tranquil space you've created here. It's gorgeous. How did you go about designing it? Did you set yourself a brief for it?
I wanted a water garden, and I wanted something that was peaceful, tranquil, calm. Because of the layout and the modern room which you view the garden from, I decided that something like a Persian paradise garden would be suitable.
And this incredible back of the house, it's a huge picture frame, isn't it, out onto the garden, this wall of glass. But it means the design of the garden is more critical than ever because you're viewing it from pretty much everywhere.
I mean, it's crucial. In a way, the design dictated that dialogue. The pond takes you down the garden, and then the tree ferns, this wonderful explosion of green at the end. You just follow that line down. It invites you to come through into the garden.
Yeah, it works beautifully. You've been very bold with your plant choice. I mean, there's a lot of architectural plants.
A garden like this, you either have to go for colour or you go for different shades and textures of green, and I went for the wonderful styles of green that you can get. Just sitting or being in a green space, you just naturally relax.
You have repeated plants here. It's not a sort of plant collector's garden in that you've got one of everything.
No, I don't want to make it too busy. You know, I think certain, like the grasses, I repeat, because I think that's sort of a theme that holds it together.
Is this your place to de-stress?
This is my therapy, and I can completely get lost and leave all the stresses behind.
The layout of this garden is so simple. Rupert has dug up the lawn and invested in this fabulous water feature which dominates the middle of the space. And from inside it lines up perfectly with the window, and actually it's the centre line, the axis of the garden as a whole. You could fold it in half. But as you move around the garden, you can hear it from everywhere, and the sound is just perfect. It's nice and tranquil, brings a calming presence to the garden, especially on a hot day like this. Green. It doesn't have to be boring, as Rupert has proved here, because there's such a range of greens right across the spectrum. And then when you think about the leaf shape, whether it's glossy or matte, and the form of the plant itself, a whole palette of plants opens up. And he's combined them beautifully here. That's the Tetrapanax papyrifera, huge architectural leaves, and it just looks wonderful holding the corner right there. And then in front we've got some smaller evergreens. This is Hebe rachiensis. It's sort of a woollier texture, but it's got a nice compact form. It looks great against the bamboo there. And in front of that, this little Pinus mugo. The needles are darker green altogether and a completely different texture. And then on this side, we've got Phoenix canariensis, the Canary Island date palm. Who said that green couldn't have drama? Now, once we have that base layer of green, seasonal shots of colour can be added in. So at the moment, we've got the water lilies that have just opened today, and then Rupert's favourite canap, panache, and the lovely blue agapanthus at the front. But they only really work because he's been so restrained with his colour, and they're all set off by the wonderful greens behind. So know a lot of people are really scared of putting shade into their garden, but it can do so much for the composition as a whole. For example, underneath this Paulonia, we've got a great shade so much, and then the hydrangea over there, all really enjoying the dappled shade beneath the tree. And then beyond, right at the back, we've got the tree ferns, again lit and highlighted. So in effect, as a composition, when you look at it from the front, you've got this layering of light and dark, and it gives a wonderful depth of field to a composition as a whole. This really is a three-dimensional garden. Your eye is drawn into corners, beautiful composition, plant combinations, and perfectly placed sculptures as well. And just to think that Rupert is not a professional, he's an amateur. This is his very first garden. But I think that ultimately the success lies in the fact that he had a vision. He knew where he wanted to go with it and created what he set out to achieve, his very own piece of paradise.
Everybody says that they want their garden to be a piece of paradise. But actually, earlier this year, I set out to make an actual paradise garden, inspired by the lots of trips I did last year around Islamic gardens all over the Middle East, Europe, and India. I wanted to make a paradise garden here at Longmeadow. Now, I set out with big, ambitious plans of big water features, rills, sunken beds, large building made out of oak and with tiles, and then life intervened. And I confess that things have gone very slowly, but it's been ticking over. We've cleared a lot, paths have been laid along the side, we're trying to reuse as many materials as possible. I've moved the Shabar, this is the central square area divided into 4 equal beds further down. And in the middle, I've got my eyes on a big basin. If I get that, I can make it just bubble over with water. So I have the gentle falling sound of water, which actually is absolutely right for a true paradise garden. And the planting will honour the paradise garden, but it'll be a Longmeadow version. So I've been growing trays of Stipa tenuissima. That's the lovely, delicate, frondy grass, which I'll use as matrix planting. It's taken a long while to get this far. Work will speed up, but I'm in no hurry. This is not a makeover, it's not a race, and sometimes things happening slowly means that they happen really well. The paradise garden may have been hanging fire, but the jewel garden is positively flaming under the sun. Haven't minded at all. They have gone over a little bit quicker than I would normally expect, but while they've been flowering, they've been glorious. Sweet peas, however, really do need at least moisture and preferably coolness as well to thrive. Last summer, for example, we had that wet summer. They were fantastic. This summer, partly through sweet pea exhaustion and partly through the weather, we've had very few indeed. But at least if you grow them in a container, you can keep them watered. And this, which I put in very late, I have to say I didn't plant this till May, which in sweet pea terms is getting on, is growing fine. It just hasn't really kicked in for flowers, but it will do, because it gets watered every week. And as with all sweet peas, even if they're not growing well, keep them tied up, because otherwise the weight of the growth, they can bend down and break and get in a tangle. Now, the plants here in the jewel garden that have done best are established ones, and we haven't had to buy anything new ones or change many. And in general, I try not to spend too much money on transforming the garden, because there's no need. You can recycle as much as possible. And we went to visit a garden where that premise hasn't in any way inhibited it from becoming something really dramatic.
I'm Wayne Milne, we're in Clapham, and although we're in the centre of London, with its city noises all around us, I find I can completely lose myself in this garden. And I call this garden Clapham meets Jamaica because I'm from Jamaica, so it's a fusion of the different elements of my life. It's not an exotic garden because I love traditional English cottage plants as well. So the two are cheek by jowl. I somewhat tongue-in-cheek refer to this garden as a Jamaican no-taste garden. Not for 1 second am I saying Jamaicans don't have any taste. What I mean by that is I'm against anything that's fashionable. It has blousy flowers, it has plants that clash next to each other, and that's one of the reasons I grow so many things in pots. I can purposely put them to clash. It's the colour of the Caribbean, as many colours as I can get into a small space. I call this my theatre of plants. It's the only part of the garden you can see from the house because the garden is on a different level, and it's the view I get every morning when I have my tea before I face the world. And the advantage of having things in pots is when the plants are at their best, they come to the theatre here, and then I can move them to other parts of the garden. It allows you to grow things that normally wouldn't grow together. The inspiration of this garden really is from my childhood, things that remind me of growing up in the Caribbean. I have a picture of me as a child, and my parents tell me that the only way they could get me to smile was to put a flower in my hand. And I think that's where my love for gardening started. I also have another picture of a view from the back of my mother's house at Banana Wharf, as she called it, and I wanted to be able to look out of my window and see a similar view. This is another section of the garden that I've created in the tradition of a veranda. And verandas in Caribbean cultures are very important. They're a place where you sit at the end of the day and have a gin and tonic or a rum punch and you gossip. My mother used to call it chat people's business, and it's where people like to be seen. So if you have the vicar coming for tea, that's the ultimate, you've made it. And it's surrounded by the different bananas, the tree ferns, the gunners, the hostas. I haven't tried to replicate a Caribbean garden because it'd be impossible. So what I go for is what I call fakery. I grow anything with big leaves that it looks like it could come from the Caribbean. When I started this garden, there was absolutely no budget. So it's really to reuse as much as possible. I knew I wanted containers, so I started to look in skips as I'm out and about. And I was astonished to find people put plants in there as well. I found a tree fern, which are very expensive, just abandoned. And I brought it back to life, and it takes pride of place on the steps. This section is where the garden really opens up. And I love the different heights and the fact that there's trees. You have so much privacy for London. There's not much depth in terms of the soil towards the back of the garden. It means that things won't get too big. But I do think it's important, even in a small garden, to have different heights. I don't see the fact that this garden is north facing as a problem, it's a challenge. Yes, there's areas where it's very shady, doesn't get much sun. But I totally disregard the guide, the rule books. If it says it needs sun, I'll still give it a try, but my cut-off point is 4 years. If after 4 years it's not doing something I like, then I do give it away, but I never throw a plant away. My top tip in terms of doing a garden budget is almost every garden centre superstore has what I call half off, half dead. Check the roots. If the roots are there, you'd be amazed what can be revived. And they're the plants I often go for, partly because I can't waste. What I'm doing here is demonstrating how to rescue a plant that perhaps has been forgotten because I have so many pots, or you build into a bucket of water and really push it in, and the bubbles you can hear means that it's the air's escaping, and I leave it there until the bubbles have stopped. And then once the bubbles stop, then you know it's had a good drink. And this really helps with the plant's recovery. And it's simply a case of taking it out and keeping an eye on it and giving it lots of love. I'm not one of those people obsessed with tidying their garden, particularly as the season goes on, you get into autumn and winter. I leave plants, not only is it good for wildlife, quite often, particularly with annuals, because in a city you have microclimates, so some annuals will come back and think, wow, it's flowering again. Like all gardeners, I wage war against slugs and snails, and I sort of see it as you win some battles, but you use as much armour as you can. The first thing I would do to protect the plants from slugs and snails is petroleum jelly, which if they're in a pot, I rub it around the edge of the rim of the pot. Then the next thing I would do is to use coffee granules, which I get from my local coffee shop, because the coffee granules, apparently the slugs and the snails don't like the texture of them. And then the final thing I do is I spray it with garlic spray. It's really important to spray underneath the plants, because that's where slugs and snails come. And hopefully we should win at least one battle. To be resumed. The feeling I get when I come into this garden is just one of I'm able to float away, and all the woes of the world just seem to disappear. But I recognise it's not everyone's cup of tea. It's not tasteful. But I don't want a tasteful garden. It's me.
Come on. Come on. I am certain that all the best gardens, whatever type they are and wherever they are in the world, are as much about their creator as they are about plants. Gardens are about gardeners as much as anything else. And I love the way that he's buying plants half price, half dead. What a brilliant idea. And just nurturing things abandoned, rescuing things from skips, and creating a wonderful garden is entirely in the spirit of what makes a garden great. Now, when he's going to open his garden next year under the National Garden Scheme, and my guess is he'll have an awful lot of visitors. My regal lilies were good this year, but they're over now. One last bloom, but in effect, they're done. And if you have lilies, if you leave the seed heads on, and although the seed heads are quite attractive and interesting, which will provide next year's flowers. So unless you actively want to keep the seeds, and it's a fairly slow process growing lilies from seed, I would cut them off, but let the foliage die back. And all that energy from the sun will go into the bulbs, and then you'll have really good flowering next year. I'll finish the rest later, but I just want to show you something, because this is Corner's China Girl. And you can see it's looking a little bit droopy and floppy in the heat. But I'm not too worried, because I know there is water for the roots to get at. And that's because I've mulched it. Now, I've mulched it with bracken to lower the pH. But the net effect, although the mulch is really dry, that's tinder dry, underneath it, if I pull it away, you can see that the compost is actually quite wet. There's a lot of moisture in there. Watering this just once a week. And there's still enough for the corners to get at. But the critical thing is to mulch, and it really doesn't matter what you use at this stage. I've used bracken there, but you could use fresh grass clippings, you could use gravel, slate, even pebbles will do. It doesn't have to be your finest garden compost. What you want is an insulating layer to stop the moisture evaporating, and that will make a difference very often between life and death. Still to come. Carol travels to Derby to visit the biggest national collection of hydrangeas in the country. And I'll be showing you how to make the use of the water that you do have as effective as possible. And certainly here at Longmeadow, which is normally a really wet place, we've had to think very carefully about which plants we water and which plants we leave to cope without. Now, it's a while since we visited Adam in his own garden, so let's go and see how he's getting on.
Oh, I love this time of year in the garden. There is loads going on. This is the wildflower that I started sowing earlier on in the year. Coming on really well, and that'll go into the autumn, probably about October time. This is my space where I get to play, mess about and experiment. And that's exactly what I want to do today. Sapphire. Last year I tried it from seed. Absolute disaster. Think about where this grows happily. On a salt marsh, tide comes in and out. And taste-wise, it has got that real taste of sea. Superb with fish. At the moment, I've got a container with no drainage holes in the bottom at all. All I've done at the moment is put crock in the bottom. So I'm hoping that the water will sit as a reservoir. And when we cover the compost, a lot of horticultural sand, some sterile soil, and compost. So there you go, it's my version of a salt marsh. But I think the magic ingredient is going to be sea salt. So, teaspoon every time I water, so that's rainwater, and then stir it. And hopefully that'll be just what this needs. Mirroring Samfire's natural conditions, it will be best in full sun. Next, I'm off to start another project, my new gravel garden. The reason I've gone for a gravel garden is because realistically it's quite a cheap and cheap way of creating, a new seating area. So I thought about, we want a table and chairs in here that sits 6. But then when it comes to design, I want to work the planting in around it. And I've looked back at the house for the inspiration, and the angle off the window really starts to pick up in the brickwork that works all the way around. And then we come to the planting. You probably won't believe me, but someone was throwing this buxus away, so I've got my hands on them. Straight away, they're creating rhythm through this space. And then we come to the tree, which is my Father's Day, but it's Lagerstromia, which is a beautiful tree, lovely evergreen leaves, but the flowers are crepe-like. So got that all in, and today I just want to get a few plants in. Before I start with the fun bit, to tell you a little bit about the soil. What I've done straight away is dug in loads of gravel and loads of manure. So what I do is work the gravel in. I'll let the weeds come up first time round when I finish planting, clear them all out, make sure there's no baddies, and then I'll use the gravel later on in the season as the mulch. Here we go. So the first thing I want to do is get through, I suppose, another layer of structure, but it's herbaceous structure. And I'm going to use grasses to do that. So this is absolutely stunning. This is Stiper barbatia. And if you look at the seed heads on this, they look like ostrich feathers. So what I'm looking to do all the time is link things together, create some sort of rhythm all the way through the space. So I've got that. You'll come through that gateway there, and bang, you'll get that movement wrapped around that post, which will be lovely. But then if we come back to the space between the buxus here, I need to repeat something back in there. So then I found this little beauty. Lots of us know Stiper, but this is called Gold Fontaine. It's a lot more upright, so if you haven't got quite that space, this works well. So I'm going to start to work those between the buxus, but they straight away pick up with more structural plant over there. So what I'm going to do now is build that little collection around that post, and then that will give me something to feed off the rest of the planting. So I want to use these salvias, so all of a sudden you can see there's just a little bit of contrast. So I'm just going to work this salvia. Roughly there in a minute, they'll move them around as I put the rest in, but you can see you're going to come through, so either side of you, you can see that salvia colour. Let's just grab these. I'm going to work the achillea just in here. And now I'm starting to think about not just shape and form, but different shaped flowers. And this is a little beauty. It's rosemary, but it's a ginger rosemary. So you get rosemary to start with, but then it finishes off with ginger. And I'm putting this one down here, because actually, as you move past, the scent will kick up. I'm really pleased with how the gravel garden's coming together. The rest of the season I'll be out there moving plants around. But it's these beauties that are going to be the jewels at the end. These succulents that I've fallen in love with the last couple of years. But all that, if I'm honest, is for another day, because now I'm off for a nice cold drink.
You see, it's the gardener that needs a nice cold drink, not necessarily all the garden. And certainly these grass borders never have been watered and never show any signs of distress as a result of drought. The philosophy behind them is very free and easy. It's based upon an initial planting of grasses and a few other companion plants that work with them, and then almost total abandon. Occasionally even weeds look good enough, you think, fine, You're doing a perfectly good job. You can stay. And that relaxed approach is very liberating, not just for the garden, but for the gardener too. Almost all of us are now finding that water is actually rationed. You face the problem of how to best use the resources you have. And that doesn't just mean water, it means time, because it takes ages. So I thought I'd just look at a few plants, particularly here in the vegetable garden, and see really what needs water and what perhaps doesn't. Now take, for example, right in front of me, I've got a bed of lettuce. This is oak. No point in watering this. It can't be rescued. It'll taste bitter. It's compost. Whereas if you take the chard, you do sometimes see it bolt and go to seed. But unlike lettuce, the leaves are not affected. So all you need to do is just cut out the flowering stem like that. Chard will withstand really quite a lot of drought, so don't waste too much water on it. Give them a really good soak once a week. You don't need to water these every day. A plant that absolutely begs for as much water as you've got to spare is a courgette. And if they don't get it, they become very prone to powdery mildew. It's a sign of being too dry. But direct the water at the roots. Try not to get the leaves wet at all. That's a complete waste of water. Now, we had a letter from Lynn Keyes, who said that her runner beans had set flowers, they'd grown perfectly well, but there were absolutely no beans at all. Runner beans really do need wet feet, so water them thoroughly at the base, and they may well produce beans, but they do not like this hot, dry weather, which of course is why they do like an average English summer. Did you know that the flowers of a runner bean taste deliciously and really strongly of runner bean? So if they don't set, eat the flowers. If it rains, you really do want to collect as much of the water as you can. So some kind of water butt or container is a good idea. Now, I like to use cattle troughs. This is a small one. You can get them in all sizes. However, if for some reason you don't have room or you can't get hold of them, it's too complicated, of course you can get a water butt. And finally, this is all doom and gloom about lack of water. Have a look at that bed of basil. I don't think I've ever grown better basil, and I certainly have taken very little trouble over it. Now, there is a plant that distinctly likes cool, fairly moist conditions that is still looking good, and not only looking good, but also becoming trendy. Carol celebrates the hydrangea.
Hydrangeas tend to have this musty, old-fashioned image. We can all remember them from our childhood. Great shrubs outside people's front doors or around the back of the house. But in recent years, there's been an enormous resurgence of interest in them, and no wonder. There's such beautiful shrubs, and it's not like we've got all new excitements to look forward to. This is the most familiar kind of hydrangea. All the mop heads, no wonder, with these great spears of flower. They're one half of a group called macrophyllars. Where I come from in Devon, they call them changeables, and that's because these colours change all the time according to the sort of soil they're growing in. This one is really pink, truly pink. In fact, you'll find most of the mop heads here are pink. The soil here is on the alkaline side. It's only when you get acid conditions prevailing that you get truly blue flowers. But whatever colour they are, they're utterly gorgeous. The other half of the macrophylla family are these lace caps. Around the edge of each flower head is this big circle of sterile flowers. Nothing going on here, but they're like flags that wave and bring in the insects. And this is what they bring them into, an absolute myriad of tiny, tiny little flowers. For some unknown reason, they're not as popular as mopeds, and yet I think that they're so elegant, so graceful, and these flowers are absolutely exquisite. Well, this is Hydrangea arborescens Annabelle. Isn't she magnificent? This is a North American species. What it does is make new shoots under the ground, and eventually this could cover this entire area. It actually needs restricting. That means that when you come to prune it, you can prune it really hard. You can do it in late autumn or early spring, and it'll burst into growth. Now, most of them are white and have these huge heads, but there are occasional ones which are pink. One of the hydrangeas that us gardeners are learning to love more and more is this. It's Hydrangea paniculata. It's an Asian species, and it gets its name because of these panicles, these sort of cones of flower. It's an incredibly elegant sort of plant. That's because lots and lots of the flowers are tiny, and then above them all are these gorgeous sterile flowers. So the plant is very, very visible, and yet at the same time it's open and airy. But not all Hydrangea paniculatas have this same form. In some cultivars, this panicle is composed totally of spatium. For these, as for all hydrangeas, is very, very similar. What they like is moist soil. But even if you've got dryish soil, incorporate loads and loads of organic matter. Water frequently, especially when just planting. And as far as pruning is concerned with these, again, they flower new wood, so you can prune them really, really hard. And that way they'll produce loads and loads of strong stems with enormous panicles of flower. Hydrangeas are amongst the easiest of all shrubs to take cuttings from, and this is a really good time to take them. Just find unflowered shoots if you possibly can, and cut just above a leaf bud, and you can actually see on these cuttings that the wood is straight, stiff, but it hasn't become brown. It hasn't turned to old wood yet. Absolutely ideal. So I've got a nice clay pot full of really well drained compost. What I need to do now is trim this just below a leaf node, because that's the point at which the stem has most of the hormones it needs to make fresh roots. Remove the bottom leaves, and then what I like to do is nip out the top here, and all that means is that when this starts to grow and it's made some root, it will shoot from these side shoots too, and it'll make a really good bushy plant. Put grit over the top, but all it needs is a really good thorough watering now. It's difficult to choose a favourite hydrangea, but over the years there are a few of them that I've come to really love. Hydrangea macrophylla Lady in Red is certainly out of the ordinary, with its cherry red sterile flowers with unusually pointed ends. Hydrangea serrata is a whole separate species. It has bright blue flowers which fade through lilac and then deepen again. And the whole bush is just so dainty, so pretty. I really want one in my garden. I've fallen for Hydrangea macrophylla salsa. Not only are its deep pink flowers edged in crimson, but its foliage is dark and dramatic too. So hard and give of their best for such a long period of time, from the summer way into the late autumn. There's absolutely no excuse for anybody not to have a hydrangea in their garden.
completely agree with Carol that hydrangeas are wonderful and everybody should have them if they can. But they are plants that like to be cool and damp. And when we have a drought like this, that can be tricky. Of course, in times of need, you can always use grey water, particularly on shrubs like hydrangeas. Now, grey water is essentially water that has had soap in it. Your bath, your shower, if you stand in a trunk when you shower, you can collect it. You're washing up water, not dishwasher or washing machine water, because the salts and the detergents are too powerful. Let it cool down. You might want to collect it in a large bucket and then use it when you've got enough. And don't add it to the leaves, but just to the base of trees, hedges, and shrubs. Hydrangeas are a very good example. Just pour it into the roots. And that soapy grey water will do no harm and an awful lot of good. Now, we have become rather obsessed by watering, but there are a few other things you can do this weekend. Under the blazing sun, Mediterranean herbs have finished flowering and are setting seed. So now is the time to give them a trim. This will stop the plants getting straggly and provoke fresh leaves, which are much nicer to use in the kitchen. If you grow plums or cherries and feel you must prune them, the time to do this is in a dry spell in summer, and that will reduce the risk of bacterial canker, which can be a killer. And in any event, never prune them in the winter months. Camellias are beginning to develop next year's flower buds, so it's important to keep them well watered. Give them a good soak every week from now to October, using rainwater if you can, but tap water is better than nothing. And there are lots of jobs to do, get stuck in, but you know, the truth is, in this weather, at this time of year, the most sensible piece of gardening advice is to stop, pour yourself a glass of whatever you fancy, and take it in. Enjoy this sunshine while it lasts, because you know as well as I do that the rain and the wind will come soon enough, and then we'll look back on this summer and wonder where it went. So, enjoy it while it lasts. And I'll see you back here at Longmeadow at the same time next week. Till then, cheers.